right, friends, Jeff, we're on chapter 7 of Atlas of the Heart. Brené Brown, places we go with others, compassion, pity, empathy, sympathy, boundaries, comparative, suffering. She's going to talk a lot about the centers in this chapter. Feeling and thinking is all over this chapter. And at some levels, the body, in terms of what you should do and should not do, there is what I found to be a lot of language of restraint going on here. Lots up front. The more that we're getting into this book, the more the intros are getting a little fuller and thicker with some philosophical ideas. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in these first couple pages and get into this. So starting with compassion and empathy on 116. Across the research and clinical practice community, there are compelling debates happening right now about the role that compassion and empathy play and how we connect with people who are struggling. Some people argue that compassion is the best response. Some people argue that it's empathy, and some people think we need both for different reasons. Everyone's trying to answer this question: what's the most effective way to be in connection with and in service to someone who's struggling without taking on their issues as their own? It's a great setup for this. There's something within us that says when others are struggling, we need to be there for them, be participants in their lives, meet them where they're at. This is a skill. This is not something that I think comes naturally. This is something that requires quite a bit of insights into how human beings function. It's next level maturity, in my view. And you're going to see that throughout this chapter in terms of, it's almost like you're walking a tightrope of how do I extend myself to those who are hurting in ways that are productive, connecting, do good for them and do good for me. There'll be a lot of that language here as well. So she continues, it's an important debate that's frustratingly hijacked on occasion by folks who come up with new arbitrary definitions for emotions that are completely different from how we all use the terms. They change the meaning, then argue that the emotion is bad, quote unquote, based on their new definition. For example, someone might say that empathy is taking on all the feelings of another person, then argue that empathy is bad. Unfortunately, this approach is often misleading and self-serving and puts no value on how we use the word. I would argue that a lot of this linguistic shell game is about wanting to be a contrarian. There's nothing more seductive and clickable than a discovery that something we believe to be good is bad. Empathy is bad for you. You can hear the one language all over this, and I empathize with Dr. Brown on this front. There is terms, definitions for emotions, and judgment of those terms is all over this book. That's the primary reason she's writing the book, is to bring a vocabulary, a rich vocabulary to our inner life and do some real business with it. And when folks start changing terms, clearly you can hear the frustration in her language, and rightly so, especially if it's for self-serving purposes, clickbaitable stuff. But to pause here, and this is just my philosopher side, linguistics have power. How you define terms has power to not only cause people to behave in certain ways, but it defines how we see reality. So much of how we understand the world around us comes through concepts, and concepts are reducible to language, and language is created. This is the place of real power in our culture, is who is defining the words. When it comes, that can be political, that can be religious, that can be in the sciences, but just like here, bedrock, in your emotions, how you come to the definitions, boom, really going to matter. She continues, when it comes to language, I'm a populist. How we, the collective, use language matters as much, if not more, than arbitrary definitions that don't center lived experience. If research is going to serve people, it has to reflect their experiences. Again, setting up the foundation for where we're going to derive our terms. Her claim here is, language has to be useful at one level, and she's defending that approach. That's a Wittgensteinian approach to language. We can only communicate if we end up embracing the same terminology, and she's elevating what research. People who are actually doing work with this come to agreement, and they set the standards for what terms mean. That seems like a great place to go. I'm down, and it makes sense that, I mean, perhaps said or unsaid, you know, if you just have a very popular Instagram account and start using terms like empathy outside of the real research here, you have stepped out of the empirical sciences into what? Into your intuitions, into your gut about things. This, by the way, is never a problem in Enneagram world. People just shooting from the hip. This is my experience, and this is what I think about fours. There's something to be said for like the real work taking place in the Enneagram world is folks who really spend a lot of time talking with folks and getting rich vocabulary from those who have typed themselves and can come to the table with insights well worth hitting here. Page 118, the relationship between compassion and empathy. She says, here's what I've learned. Compassion is a daily practice, and empathy is a skill set that is one of the most powerful tools of compassion. I want to pause here again. A lot of this chapter had my philosopher side, my ears burning, because this is an Aristotelian idea. Daily practice is about habit. Empathy as a skill set is a virtue. She doesn't define it that way later, but at least in this definition, that's what's going on. Daily practice is habit, and Aristotle says quite a bit about habits, and habits being the place where the good life starts. You have to put into place good habits, and good habits, once they take anchor, they start out, as the saying goes, they start out thin and almost like spider webs. But as one continues to practice and practice and practice, they become chains. Both good habits are this way and bad habits are this way. And it's very hard to break chains. But once you begin that process of the daily habits, you develop virtues, you develop human excellences. Those habits become a part of you. And in her language, it's a skill set. I don't think you can just, skill sets are hard to come by. For some of us, we couldn't throw a football 25 yards. But if you really, 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 really practice over and over again, you probably could develop the skill set for throwing a football 25 yards. Finance, the work that we do. My dad's a dentist. It's a skill set. It just takes years for some of these things. And I think this is correct. Empathy is a skill set. Compassion is a choice. Compassion is more like a daily habit. I'm going to put on this clothing today and let it do its business in me. That strikes me as a valuable place to be. She continues, our working definition of compassion first emerged from the data about 10 years ago. It's been revised over time, but the core has remained the same and has stood the test of new data. Compassion is the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness and we take action in the face of suffering. Set aside taking action for a moment. That mindset, recognizing, accepting shared humanity and treating others with loving kindness, that's putting on clothes, the clothing of compassion. Compassion, she says, is a virtuous response. And that's, again, I think that's missing the category. But at one level, it is a virtuous response. It's a human excellence to engage the world with compassion. It makes you better, makes the world better, makes others better. This is when there was a lot of work on, I've forgotten what this is called, but if you imagine a quadrant in which there's just two big categories, doing good for others and doing good for yourself. And in this quadrant, the wise do things that are good for others and good for themselves. There are some who are too self-giving and they're doing good for others at damage to themselves. And then there are some who do good for themselves at the cost of others. And then there are the fools who do damage to themselves and their actions do damage to others. That quadrant, I think, is really helpful because so often, especially in the religious tradition I grew up in, loving people at cost yourself is kind of the highest virtue. And I'm curious if there's not something bigger here, that doing good for others while at the same time doing great good for yourself may be the best kinds of choices. We don't often think about things that way, but I have found that to be a helpful reflection. What sort of choices can I make that both benefit the people around me at a high level and benefit myself at a high level? Being the one that I am, sacrifice is a real easy gear for me. I can shift into sacrificing my heart, my mind, my body for others very quickly. That's not necessarily a virtue. On the flip side, obviously, doing good for yourself at cost to others, sapping others, that's not a good thing. And there are lots of people, specifically in political life these days, who make terrible choices for everyone else, but their terrible choices also are making themselves miserable. These are fools. These people should not be trusted with power. 4. In her book, The Place That Scares You, the American Buddhist nun Pema Chodron, I'm sure I'm butchering that, I apologize, writes, when we practice generating compassion, we can expect to experience our fear of pain. Compassion practice is daring. It involves learning to relax and allow ourselves to move gently toward what scares us. Compassion practice is daring. It involves learning to relax and allow ourselves to move gently toward what scares us. I resonate with this. Being compassionate, I feel intimidated sometimes, and not because the person in front of me is suffering. Mostly for me as a one, it ends up being that I want to do the right thing for the sake of the people who are suffering, and that can be a place that feels kind of unshaky, or it feels shaky. A lot of that comes from the fact that I have not developed the skill set of empathy that she's talking about. I'm very aware that this is something I'm very low at for the most part, and it's a challenge to get better here. She writes, this paragraph, the one from the Buddhist nun, completely rearranged my parenting approach. I went from always wanting to fix things and make things better, because she a one, to literally sitting in the dark with my kids. Before I fully understood what the action part of compassion wasn't making things better or fixing, I would race to flip on the metaphorical lights with my kids when they were suffering. Now I try to sit with them in the dark and show them how to feel the discomfort. Big 4 move for her. I mean, if she's a 1, that what she is doing is shutting down action, moving into something more like high side 4 space for the sake of the people that she cares about. This may be, in fact, why I have a hard time jumping into empathy, is because it's pushing me into my stress move. So only if you go to the high side of your stress move is that going to be like an effective place for you to go for the 1. Some of you will find this very easy. This whole chapter is made for 4s and 5s. Thinking about feeling and feeling your thinking is all over her language here. And I imagine you 4s and 5s really could get into and relate to some of the stuff that she was saying here. But it's difficult for some of us. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't jump into it. It just means it's difficult. 119, pity. While compassion is not rescuing, it's also not pity. In fact, pity is the near enemy of compassion. She's going to use this term, the near enemy, quite a few times, so get it in your mind. In her book, Fierce Self-Compassion, University of Texas researcher Kristen Neff writes, near enemy is a useful Buddhist concept referring to a state of mind that appears similar to the desired state. Hence, it is near, but actually undermines it, which is why it's an enemy. Far enemy are the opposite of emotions or experiences. The far enemy of compassion might be cruelty. What's interesting is that near enemies are often greater threats than far enemies because they're more difficult to recognize. Pity here is a negative, and it's a negative because of the power dynamics. And she brings this up a handful of times kind of subtly. But when somebody is suffering in front of us and perhaps sharing, being vulnerable, there is a power dynamic there. Vulnerability, obviously, is a surrender of control. And it is a placing oneself in, some, not subjugation, but what would you call that? Places you in some ways at the mercy of another. And this is why like trusting others is so big in these spaces. If I'm going to hand you my heart, I'm entrusting myself to you. I've said this a handful of times, but confidence and confiding comes from the word with trust. And so if I'm confiding with you about my pain, my struggles, my future, my issues, I'm placing a trust in you. And trust ends up being both communal. You can build huge things if you can establish community. But it also ends up being one of those places where someone can obviously betray you. And being able to name that, really important. She continues, and this is a quote from Cornfield, "The near enemy of compassion is pity. Instead of feeling the openness of compassion, pity says, oh, that poor person, I feel sorry for people like that. Pity sees them as different from ourselves. It sets up a separation between ourselves and others, a sense of distance and remoteness from the suffering of others that is affirming and gratifying to the self. Affirming and gratifying to the self. Why? Because it's about comparison. For this is a heart thing, I think, in this space. Comparison can be one of those things that enters if we become self-focused, elevate ourselves over others. Pity is, in essence, it's a low side comparative move in this language. Compassion, on the other hand, recognizes the suffering of another as a reflection of our own pain. I understand this. I suffer in the same way. It's an empathetic, a mutual connection with the pain and sorrow of life. Compassion is a shared suffering. I love that. Pity is excluding the other, separating from the other. Compassion is the opposite. It is sharing. It's communal. We are sharing an experience, even if you're not necessarily suffering yourself at that time. It's opening ourselves to that. We talked quite a bit about that last week, and it's worth naming here. It's good. Well said here. Lots of great stuff throughout the rest of this section on pity, but I need to move on into her chapter on empathy. She writes, most researchers agree that there are at least two elements to empathy: cognitive empathy and affective empathy. You'll notice, by the way, cognitive is going to be about your mind. Affective empathy is going to be about your body. And empathy itself is about your heart. So again, three centers at work, dynamic, playing against each other. Cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy, sometimes called perspective taking or mentalizing, is the ability to recognize and understand another person's emotions. Affective empathy, often called experience sharing, is one's own emotional attunement with another person's experience. When I first read this, I thought, I am low on the cognitive empathy side, but I'm pretty good at the affective side. And then she kind of says, affective is probably not going to be the way you want to go. Based on my work, I believe meaningful connections require a combination of compassion and cognitive empathy or perspective taking. In simple terms, the empathy I'm talking about is understanding, again, the mind, what one is feeling, not feeling it for them. So not taking that into your body is what I took there. If someone's feeling lonely, empathy doesn't require us to feel lonely too, only to reach back into our own experience with loneliness so we can understand and connect. Affective empathy, feeling something along with the person who is struggling, is a slippery slope toward becoming overwhelmed and not being able to offer meaningful support. So I think this is wise. There is something about like doing the business of compassion in your feeling center and in your mind, in your head center. And that's where it ought to reside, is what I read there. Now, she's going to say some stuff coming up that may call this into question. And I'm going to bring this up just so, like, we should talk about this because I'm not exactly sure how to square this circle. But for the time being, that strikes me as, valuable, especially, if you're like in counseling. You can't take everybody's pain into your physicality in that way. So maybe being able to do business in your mind and heart is a better way. But many of you are going to be much wiser than me on this. So we'll discuss this Tuesday. Hey, by the way, on Tuesday night, if you get into this chapter, we meet on Tuesday nights to discuss this book and others. Do sign up for a membership at aroundthecircle.org and join us. We would love to have you. Last time we had 16 people discussing the last chapter. It was great fun, and we would love to have you. It's not for everybody, but it might be for you. Jump in. She says later, and she quotes Kristen Neff, that practicing mindfulness is part of empathy. And she says this is not pushing away emotion because it's uncomfortable, but feeling it and moving through it. I highlight this because it feels like a contradiction to what she just said, feeling something and moving through it. But that might be not affective. It might just be in your feeling center. She writes, again, empathy is a tool of compassion. We can respond empathetically only if we are willing to be present to someone's pain. If we're not willing to do that, it's not really empathy. So I suppose being present here, again, not physical in the affective sense, but present in the emotional, mental sense is her recommendation. There is a balance that I'm real curious about, that, how ought we to engage in others' pain in terms of inserting ourselves into that space? On the face of it, inserting yourself into that space is not what's being suggested. But some of the stuff in the future here, she's going to talk about getting into those spaces. So I'll be curious what you think. Quote 8 from me, 124, we're on sympathy. Empathy is not sympathy. In fact, using the near enemy concept, we can definitely consider sympathy the near enemy of empathy. Rather than being a tool for connection, sympathy emerged in the data as a form of disconnection. Sympathy is removed. When someone says, I feel sorry for you, or that must be terrible, they're standing at a safe distance. Rather than conveying the powerful me too of empathy, it communicates not me, then adds, but I do feel sorry for you. Sympathy can even be a trigger for shame, which we will discuss in the next chapter. Again, it feels to me like the tension of inserting yourself is at play here. How are you getting into that space of compassion that she noted up front as a daily practice, but doing so in a way that's healthy? Because sympathy can look a lot like compassion. As she's saying, it's a near enemy. It's really more about wisdom. What's the wisdom of compassion? Moving off of sympathy into the empathetic. And I think she's right to judge sympathy on that front. It's really about the fruit. It's, again, distance, as was said, disconnection, and what's your proper place? I had a great conversation with the fantastic Lindsay Taylor, who's a therapist in Alabama. We were talking about the ideas of this being a you problem versus this being a me problem. And we were dialoguing through this. This will be in our upcoming one panel discussion. And she went through those categories and said, sometimes it's an us problem. We should think of things as an us problem. Sympathy in this space feels like it is a posturing in such a way as to say that's a you problem and I'm going to distance myself. Empathy feels like it is inviting yourself into, or you have been invited into somebody else's pain and you're making it an us problem and doing business with it. And that takes, again, I feel like that just takes a ton of wisdom and self-awareness and real skills that aren't easy to come by. And so if you're going to get there, you got to work on it. She quotes an author. Let's be clear, empathy and pity are not the same thing. When non-people of color, non-females tell our story, they may think they're creating empathy, but they unconsciously channel pity, which can often look like empathy, but it's not. The difference is hierarchy. I bring this up just again to say power dynamics are all over this chapter. And that's really what I saw. So again, philosopher that I am, I'm just reading Foucault into all of this. 10, the minute I try to put myself in your place rather than try to understand the situation from your perspective, our empathetic connection unravels. Either I get sucked into the vortex of my own emotional difficulties, or because my experience doesn't match yours, I doubt what you're telling me. Balance. It's a great picture of balance. Again, very Aristotelian approach to feelings throughout this chapter. Balance is, moderation is the chief virtue for Aristotle. And this is a good expression of that. Like in terms of not too much, not too little, you have to hit kind of that. There's two ways to fall off a horse, to the right or to the left, but only one to like sit up straight on the horse. That's why I read there. Page 125 at the bottom. Last, the number one question I get when I'm teaching empathy is, how can I be empathetic with someone if I haven't had their experience? It's a great question because it exposes a dangerous myth about empathy. Empathy is not relating to an experience. It's connecting to what someone is feeling about an experience. When I'm working with groups, I often ask participants to raise their hands if they know joy, hurt, heartbreak, shame, grief, love, etc. At the end, after all of the hands have been raised to every emotion, I say you're qualified. You don't need to be the expert or experience what they've experienced. You need to connect your own experiences in a thinking way that creates emotional resonance. Oh yeah, I know that feeling. I'm not going to fall into it right now, but I know it and I can communicate with you in a way that makes you know you're not alone. Full body comes in here, full self. You need to connect your own experiences. That would be a physical experience in some sense. In a thinking way, there's your head. It creates emotional resonance. There's your heart. The holistic self is all over her prescription for the appropriate way to be empathetic. And that, I think that's helpful, because empathy is going to require all of yourself. So she does have a little side chapter. What would you call this? It's an illustration that talks through empathy misses. This was well worth reading. I can't spend too much time on this. It will be another half hour of podcast, but she wants to name 8 ways that we miss when being empathetic. And again, naming here are 8 ways that you can miss is wise. It's pitching, truth into situations. And for me, I'm like, damn it, I hit these 2 or 3 of these most of the time when being in relation with others. And so there's an art form. There's an art form to throwing a football. There's an art form to delivering a speech. There's an art form to being empathetic. It's a skill set. Some of the misses. Sympathy versus empathy. Moving into that sympathetic space where you say, I feel sorry for you, she says, is a miss. Being judgmental. You should feel shame at this thing. That's a miss. Disappointment. In the midst of this pain, you've let me down. That's a miss. Discharging discomfort with blame. This feels terrible. Who can we blame? I never do that. Let's get angry at people. That's a good way to move through the pain. Number 5, minimize and avoid. Let's make this go away. This isn't a problem. Number 6, comparing and competing. If you think that's bad, yeah. I realize you had somebody break up with you, but let me tell you about when my parents died, something of that sort. 7, speaking truth to power. Don't upset people or make them uncomfortable. It's kind of you're being spastic with your pain. And lastly, advice giving, problem solving. I can fix this and I can fix you. Here's what you should do. Again, not something I ever do as a 1. That's never on my mind. Never what I do. Not me. Not this Jeff Cook. Nope. Always on the up and up, Jeff Cook. Empathy misses. That's all wise. Worth internalizing. Again, skill set. Boundaries is her next subchapter 128. In The Gift of Imperfection, I write, the heart of compassion is really acceptance. The better we are at accepting ourselves and others, the more compassionate we become. Well, it's difficult to accept people when they are hurting us or taking advantage of us or walking all over us. This research has taught me that if we really want to practice compassion, we have to start by setting boundaries and holding people accountable for their behavior. Okay, so in some situations, the person in pain is actually hurting you. That needs to get named. This is a hard thing for me. Thinking repressed one that I am. I'm just shifting into how can I fix things for the people I love in my life. And sometimes toxic people are toxic towards the people who are trying to help them get their lives together. That's what I read here is the boundaries. Thinking repression for me, when people start sharing their pain, sometimes it can morph into gaslighting. Sometimes it can come out in very unhealthy ways. Here's my pain. And when you are available and empathetic, the result is actually not positive. And so anyway, setting boundaries, I think she is quite right. And again, it's a place of wisdom. Boundaries. She says, why did the lack of boundaries and judgment seem to go hand in hand? The thing about boundaries is you need judgment to establish boundaries. Where does the boundary go? I thought that was funny. I didn't really set that up, but she's talking it through the negatives of judgment, but boundaries require judgment. Anyway, side note. Comparative suffering is where she lands, and we'll talk all through this. And again, I would love your thoughts on this chapter. What hit you? Let me just again note, this material is really difficult for me. I feel like I can see the skill set, and I also don't have the skill set. I would love to have more of the skill set, but this is going to be, something that's going to take quite a while for me. And so maybe it just starts with naming some stuff, but I will be very curious what hits you all and what's worth talking about. Landing on comparative suffering. Empathy is not finite, and compassion is not a pizza with 8 slices. When you practice empathy and compassion with someone, there's not less of these qualities to go around. There is more. Not less, there's more. This, again, is an Aristotelian category. Or Aristotle talks about limited goods and unlimited goods. Limited goods are like pizza slices. There's only so much pizza to go around. Unlimited goods are the best things in life. Love, wisdom, knowledge are available in seemingly unlimited supplies. Your love can grow the more that you give it out. It can replicate, reproduce, move forward. Unlimited goods are those that tend to be related most to happiness. And I think that's where she's landing. In fact, the last quote, and I'm going to pitch something that I think is really interesting here. Yes, perspective is critical, but I'm a firm believer that sharing how we feel, even complaining, is okay as long as we piss and moan with a little perspective. Hurt is hurt, and every time we honor our own struggle and the struggles of others by responding with empathy and compassion, the healing that results affects us all. So, big idea for me recently, and I'm going to post on an idea called Spiral Dynamics on Thursday that's going to build on this, but there is the personal success value. I'm standing on my own 2 feet and building some amazing stuff. Success, progress, understanding that can be just like a lot of us want to live in that space and be above it all. And sometimes maturity means realizing that doesn't work all the time. In fact, there's some easy places to point out where it doesn't work, mostly around pain. And maturity for that person often looks like stopping and getting into a round table and hearing other people's stories and sharing your own stories and finding commonality across cultures and across, your own personal experiences, and finding new and relevant truths in the round table setting as opposed to the individual, I can just study this, understand this all on my own side of things. This is worth naming. And as we close this section, it struck me that this is the human experience, and getting to that spot of shared communal experience is a great good. So that's what I got for this week. Appreciate y'all. Again, if you want to join us to talk about this, Tuesdays, aroundthecircle.org. Look for announcements and you'll find the links. May all good things be yours. Hey friends, it's Jeff. We're celebrating here at Around the Circle. Our Start Here podcast, which helps folks find their type, has been the #1 Enneagram podcast on iTunes all year. This podcast channel just passed 6,000 subscribers and 2 million downloads, and we're closing in on 1,000 free members at aroundthecircle.org. More than this is the 1-year anniversary of our book. Around the Circle is out on Amazon. Kindle version is just $9. Audio version has all kinds of extras, or you can get the uber fancy print version, which has our mistyping guide. But more than this, we're moving to want to connect with you more. Real Enneagram work. We have been very aware recently. Real Enneagram work often requires real conversations. And so as we enter the next season, we're going to focus on creating more online panels and workshops. So this month, we're talking with members about coping style and how each of the types solves problems on Mondays. Our second Saturday workshop will begin hitting a new topic in August when we have 30 or 40 people assemble. And every Tuesday night, we continue to have our reading room, which presently we are wrapping up Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart. It's on emotion and exploring how emotions overlap with the Enneagram. Also next month, and this is new, I'm going to begin speaking exclusively with men about their experience of the Enneagram. We don't often hear from men reflecting on their inner lives in these spaces, but those who do engage the Enneagram often have extraordinary stories to tell. So I'm going to try and get men together, talk shop. So if you want to connect, very easy. Go to aroundthecircle.org, sign up for a free membership, and you will get all of our announcements, all the links to all of our free stuff. Or if it's time for you and your family to do some serious work, become a $20 member. All the links to our online classes and conversations will open up for you, and we would love to meet you. That's what I got for this month. I'm Jeff. May all good things be yours.